Moving into our next topic, I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. John Armstrong from the Committee on Trauma and Dr. Tim Mullett from the Commission on Cancer, who are going to share with us their perspectives in each of the organizations on the 100th anniversary of both of these pillars of the American College of Surgeons. So welcome them to the stage, Dr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. I feel that I am basking in the glow of real people in a real place, and I find inspiration from looking at all of your faces. It's my privilege to take us through a very brief journey of 100 years of our Committee on Trauma. And I'm delighted to be doing it in collaboration with the Commission on Cancer. It's great to have two components of our college celebrating 100 years together. And I think, as you will hear, there are many parallels to activities over the past century. For my portion, at the end of our conversation, you should be able to describe several features of the Committee on Trauma that have contributed to lasting success. The context is provided by Oliver Berkman in this book to which I commend your attention, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. If you think about organized civilization, it's about 6,000 years. And if you think about 6,000 years as a chain of centenarians, there are 60 of those. And the Committee on Trauma is one of those centenarian lifetimes. And where were we 100 years ago? Well, you can see on the left Charles Locke Scudder's elegant tome on treatment of fractures from 1902, so 120 years ago. And this is how Committee on Trauma got started. A surgeon appreciated that there was a standard for care of patients with fractures from the scene through hospitalization, and that standard really wasn't being met. So how could he organize an activity that would spread best practice across the country? So in 1922, the college established the Committee on Fractures, and Charles Locke Scudder was the first chair of that committee. Subsequently, in 1949, the Committee on Fractures became the Committee on Trauma, appreciating the much broader needs of those who are injured and, importantly, organizing their care. We'll take a look on the right and see resources for optimal care of the injured patient and recognize that 100 years later, in a 7th edition, we have put in place the structures and the standards for ensuring best patient care. And we have verified American College of Surgeons trauma centers across this country to that end. Appreciate that we have promulgated standards through advanced trauma life support. And early on, it was recognized that we needed to think about how we get people to understand what it is that they're supposed to do in ways to which they could relate. Advanced trauma life support, as many know, emerged from a tragedy in a Nebraska cornfield to be now in its 10th edition as the preeminent coda for best practice in care of injured patients and for care of mass casualties. Well, let's think about our trauma system. In 1922, here you see a cartoon that indicates that there might be a rollover crash on the left, and you may or may not have this type of ambulance pick you up, and literally it was pick you up. There was not anything that was going to happen to you inside the vehicle. You would go to something that looked like this, a run-of-the-mill hospital. You were like every other patient, and then, sometimes you made it home and sometimes you didn't. And that was the trauma system of its day. Well, now, in 2022, going from left to right, you can appreciate across multiple mechanisms of injury, We have multiple ways of getting injured patients to places that can save their lives and restore living. We have urban that tends to be a bit more developed than rural, which is in a dotted line. And we respect that there are multiple points of entry into the trauma system, but ultimately we want to align the patient's needs with the resources to do right by that patient and think beyond the actual acute hospitalization to rehabilitation and to going home, and not just going home to stay home, but getting back to life, getting back into the community. So we've made substantial progress in how it is that we organize as a system. Well, if I think about factors that have led to this success, I believe that the core to all of this has been a curiosity that just won't go away. How are we doing with care of the patients? What is, as Codman said, the end result? And how can we do it better? How can we save more lives? And I think from this core, we have leveraged standards and innovative education, prominently through simulation, development of systems locally and regionally, data-driven exploration through the Trauma Quality Improvement Program to understand not only how we're doing in our facilities, but how we compare to others and how we can raise all boats, so to speak. Why don't we prevent injury to begin with? As I recall telling a reporter as trauma medical director, I said, my message is put us out of business. Be safe. Wear your helmets. Look both ways before you cross the street. Wear your seatbelt. Don't speed. We've really invested in that. And then community engagement, prominently displayed through the Stop the Bleed program, which now has touched almost 2 million people globally. Well, where are we going? We're taking what I just shared with you with relentless curiosity to the next level. And so at the start of the next 100 years, our next centenarian, if you will, we're focused on the conversation to drive a national trauma and emergency preparedness system. We have a blueprint. It has 5 elements that you see there, focused on public health readiness, because we've learned a lot through COVID, quite frankly, that we want to share with the rest of the country. And the trauma system can be a foundation for readiness of multiple mass population or casualty events. And we focus on standards as a nation, performance improvement as a nation, research as a nation, public outreach as a nation. It is time for a national trauma system. We also appreciate that within that construct, and yet moving at its own speed, is the notion of regional medical operations centers, which you see here on the cartoon overlay of the United States, where we have organized centers in communities and regions and states that work to define casualty needs and patient needs and distribute patients and casualties to appropriate resources within the community and to align resources with those casualty needs. The time has come to have this network so that we have a foundation for readiness moving forward. And we're thinking about the next generation of trauma surgeons. Future Trauma Leader 100 has been a fantastic program. It is designed to immerse young trauma surgeons in all the activities of the Committee on Trauma and to have them engage in projects that have produced meaningful results to advance the care of injured patients. You see in the photo the most recent cohorts of future trauma leaders who gathered together for a mentorship day with leaders of the Committee on Trauma. We are expanding our community. Well, as I then reflect on the ultimate story of the Committee on Trauma, I do find in Daniel Coyle's book, The Culture Code, that the COT cracked the code. There was a shared vulnerability. We don't have what we need to take care of patients the right way, and I would say that became a shared commitment. And the COT created connections through regional committees, state committees, nationally, that created a culture for community that put the injured patient first. And as I reflect on this community that we've created, I remain mindful that in the end, it's communities that create the paths that we walk. And I have actually been engaged in COT activities for a third of the existence of the COT. And my story began with this card, which was my ATLS card. Yes, it's 16 September 1988. And I moved from this card, which continued my commitment to care of injured patients, to becoming an ATLS instructor, becoming Army State Chair, moving standards for disaster readiness, engaging our college for a seminal systems report that put out the fire in our trauma system in Florida, Stop the Bleed here with Len Jacobs, Sheila Jackson Lee on Capitol Hill, and Asset Plus, readying military surgeons for care downrange of wounded heroes. But I've also had a chance to have a little fun to really drive advocacy. You put this all together and you appreciate that the story of the COT is about collaboration, collegiality, and friendship. We have demonstrated what happens when like-minded people get together and truly work to make life better for those who are injured. And here we see two of our great leaders, Eileen Bulger, immediate past chair of the Committee on Trauma and now medical director for the trauma program, and Jeff Kirby on the right, who is the new COT chair. We've had great leaders. That's part of the great people. I will state that the COT ultimately is an advocacy organization. It has taken advocacy in many different directions, leveraging education and quality and systems, and yes, legislative and executive advocacy, as well as Stop the Bleed and injury prevention. All of this is nicely captured on the Bulger quilt created by Eileen. You notice injury, a moment of crisis, a lifetime of impact, and appreciate in the frame of all the COT activities the importance of friendship. Delighted to celebrate COT 100, and I look forward to your questions on the panel. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. That was a great talk. Appreciate that. It was ironic that the date that you signed for your ATLS card for the Army was the same day that I accepted my commission for the Army back in 1988. It's amazing. Well, good morning, and it is a privilege to be able to represent some of the work that we are doing within the Commission on Cancer, and we want to thank Dr. Sutherland, Dr. Turner, and the other distinguished guests that are here for this opportunity. I'm Tim Mullet. I'm a thoracic surgeon at the University of Kentucky, and I have the privilege to be able to represent the work of so many people working for your Commission on Cancer. We are honored to be able to celebrate this 100 years, and clearly looking back into the 1920s, we understand that times were different. When we were approaching Prohibition, we were looking at the opportunities to look for women to vote and other chances for moving through our society. And medicine was very different. Insulin was just being discovered. We were looking at the identification of EKGs, and penicillin, vitamins, and therapy was becoming available. And cancer care was primarily assigned to the surgeon. Cancer radical mastectomies were present for most of the breast cancers that were identified as large tumors, and emerging X-ray therapy, medical treatments with hormone therapy, and early exploration of immune treatments were available. But the college came forward to recognize the need to focus on this increasingly complex territory, and the Committee on the Treatment of Malignant Diseases was formed. And our founding principle, seen here, to reduce the suffering and mortality from cancer by an organized application of the knowledge that is already available, is actually what we stand for today. And it is even more relevant than in 1931, as the pace of medical knowledge is moving so fast. And we've grown to 1,500 cancer programs across the country. We represent 26% of the hospitals, and 72% of all cancer cases that are cared for in the United States come through Commission on Cancer accredited facilities. And it is not just the surgeons and medical oncologists and radiation docs and other providers that represent care. It's actually nearly 70 professional organizations representing the full spectrum of cancer care, advocacy, patients, as well as the opportunities for engaging with other organizations in research and administrative. And the program has grown from what was the Committee on Malignant Diseases to now represent a full spectrum of opportunities for the treatment of the cancer patients. And as we've gone forward, we can see that we've moved this transformation because of certain structural elements that have come forward in our cancer programs to identify the needs of the Cancer Committee, parallel the Committee on Trauma with the identification of the multidisciplinary care, the tumor boards, the opportunity for our data tracking with the National Cancer Database, which is emerging as a preeminent force for moving our education and moving our evidence forward. And then our cancer staging program with the AJCC to standardize where we are. And this organization, beginning in 1931, has led to now 3 accreditation programs in the COC, as well as the NAPBC for breast centers and the rectal program for accreditation, and 91 standards, 23 quality measures, and the National Cancer Database is supporting all of this. These data reports that come out, again, similar to the Trauma Quality Improvement Program, the Cancer Quality Improvement Program represents the program's own data coming back to them to be able to look for opportunities for addressing disparities and addressing improvements that are necessary within their own change. So certainly this 100-year celebration for the Commission on Cancer has been an exciting time as it kicked off in October, and we go through this year with numerous opportunities, and I encourage you to look to the microsite that's been developed that includes a number of videos and interviews and images of where we've been. We were fortunate to have the bulletin dedicated to the 100 years of the Commission on Cancer this year in January, and appreciate everybody's input for that. The college has donated support from the archives office, and these folks have been dramatic in delivering information for us to be able to put that together. So we certainly thank the college for all of the effort that has gone forward to be able to articulate the message of 100 years. But we're not sitting on 100 years of laurels to be able to stay relevant in the world of cancer care. Today, we're moving forward with efforts in operative standards based on the evidence that's been put forward in the published works of the operative standards for cancer surgery, now 4 volumes that exist, but these first 6 operative standards have now come forward to define the key elements of which operations are performed for surgeons, and this is only the beginning. We are looking at now at breast, melanoma, colon, rectum, and lung. Some of these are dependent upon a path report to be able to make sure that certain lymph nodes have been taken or that the total mesorectal excision has been completed for the rectal case. Others are going to be dependent upon the operative report. And so for that, we are transforming our traditional narrative operative report into more of a defined, discrete checklist identifying specifically those elements that are necessary for the completion of the appropriate operation for cancer. This is a communication tool that can now be mined for evidence and looking for elements of the operation that have been completed with a universal language and a checklist format, similar to what you've been comfortable with the synoptic pathology reports. And so certainly we expect to see the same improvement in patient care and outcomes defined. Examples of visual abstracts are provided and are been disseminated to all of our programs and surgeons that are to provide the relevant information to make sure that they're aware of the standards, the need for the standards, and how it's going to be implemented. Moving forward in a different direction, national quality improvement initiatives have been initiated because this has been a challenging area for many programs to define quality improvement, to demonstrate quality improvement, to measure that, and to use evidence-based strategies and methodologies that have been proven. So this began out of the needs of the pandemic, when it was recognized that screening was diminishing because of the isolation and the restriction on practice, and that we needed to get patients to come back to screening. Otherwise, we were going to have substantially higher mortality over the next 10 years associated with breast, colon, lung, and others. And so a package was created in a very rapid time frame and delivered to our programs, and over 840 projects were completed in those diseases to be able to lead to 70,000 additional screening tests in 2021. And so this program is continuing to be represented. It was published last week, and we're certainly excited to be able to see that progress. In another area, we've initiated a project called the Just Ask Tobacco Assessment Project, and this is looking at the understanding that there is a distinction between the causative elements of tobacco and many of the cancers that we see, but the impact of tobacco on most cancers, breast, colon, lung, but also hematologic diseases and most cancers that we take care of continued tobacco exposure and the increased mortality that's associated with that, and the dramatic improvement that's seen when patients are able to quit during treatment. And so the first step is to understand the patients that are at risk, and so the project's called Just Ask. We're learning to document and increase the fidelity with which we are tracking patients that are exposed to tobacco, ultimately leading to more patients to get treated. And leaning forward into the next 100 years, we recognize that we do see only 26% of the hospitals in the country. That may be appropriate, but we want to make certain that we are optimizing our network strategies, and so we've reviewed and published new network standards. We understand that pediatric access to accredited facilities has been limited, and so we've now developed a dual accreditation process where you can have an adult accreditation as well as a pediatric accreditation, and new standards that have been put together from an expert group are being published this month. We're also carefully studying rural hospitals as an opportunity to understand the disparity in cancer care in this population. We know that they have challenges similar to what was described in the trauma setting. The rural population have limited resources, have difficulties with distance, with geography, with education, and with financial resources. And so we want to be able to develop an on-ramp for accreditation for these programs to raise the value of accreditation, raise the value of the quality of care that's delivered without diluting the effectiveness of accreditation status. And finally, we've been very diligent about integrating equity, diversity, and inclusion in all of our accreditation processes. And it includes looking at our leadership, looking at our membership, and looking at how we represent our work. So it certainly is a privilege to be able to talk with you today, and I look forward to your questions as we go forward with the next 100 years.
So we have a few minutes for questions. Anyone from the audience? Kathleen, do you have any?
Dave Welsh from Batesville, Indiana. I want to thank both you gentlemen for your presentation, and also thank you. You're part of the college and the college itself for the help it gives me and my colleagues in rural Indiana. As a rural hospital, thank you for your comments about our special challenges, but the COC at the ACS has helped us in Batesville and the surrounding hospitals to give better care to our patients. And COT, I can't tell you how much you have helped us in Indiana. We're very close to completing our statewide trauma system. We could not be where we are today without the assistance of the American College of Surgeons COT. So I thank you, and these two, both your groups are helping push better care in Indiana, and especially rural Indiana. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for two stellar talks. This is on the trauma. So we know that the autonomous vehicle that's in the immediate near future is probably going to be very disruptive as far as trauma on the highways are concerned. And I wonder if there will be any downside to that in terms of our organization, of our response to trauma in general, as we start to see less and less of these auto accidents.
Thank you for your question. I think you make another compelling case for a national trauma system where we can anticipate what's happening with life, and we can move to put in place safeguards so that we prevent injury from autonomous vehicles, very similar to work that we did to get seatbelts into the current motor vehicles.
Thank you. I'm in agreement.
Thank you.
Dr. Hughes.
Hi, Tyler Hughes from McPherson, Kansas. Thank you for your presentations, and I'm struck that here are two very successful entities over 100 years, but I do notice a certain difference. When we talk about trauma, we talk about centers 1 through 4, RMOCs, seems more structured than we do in a committee on cancer. Could you kind of, both of you, compare and contrast those concepts? Am I missing that you're actually doing the same thing, or is it different? And how could we blend the successes of each?
Sure.
Well, I'll start with that, and thank you for the question. It is, I think there are a number of similarities that are here. If we look at our structure of the Commission on Cancer and Committee on Trauma, the focus is on, we have Education Committee, we have Advocacy Committee, we have other elements that are important, as well as accreditation. But I think that the areas of education are also similar when we look at the opportunities for public-facing education to be able to look for reduction in opportunities for developing cancer, for earlier detection, for other awareness features that are needed. And then there's the professional education piece where we're looking at the providers and making certain that those elements of the evidence-based treatments are actually being disseminated in ways that are appropriate. I think that there are challenges in each of those areas, but I certainly think that those are the similarities that we have.
I will just add that we are very focused on the continuum of care, which might be a little longer than the continuum of care for cancer, and that energizes our efforts to get systems in place across multiple organizations and professionals.
You know, that's an interesting point. I think that the continuum of care for us obviously begins with prevention, but ultimately leads to ideally survivorship and getting patients back into life. And so I think that too is a similarity, but the existence of being able to get these systems to work together is something that I've been working on for the last few years, which has been developing appropriate hybrid care, where we might be able to again, similarities. If you look at the trauma patient that winds up at a level 1, level 2 trauma facility and ultimately is moved to a level 4 facility otherwise, we have areas where patients may wind up with care, such as chemotherapy or radiation treatment can be delivered locally, but they may need a particularly technical operation, a rectal resection, esophageal resection, or perhaps resources aren't available, such as thoracic surgery in their community. And so being able to share that patient between facilities is an area that I think we are looking at making sure that we can improve the communication so that their care is not disrupted and is not handled in a siloed fashion, but handled in a collaborative manner.
Thank you, sir. My name is Mark. I am a medical student from St. George University and a critical care nurse. I really enjoyed both your gentlemen's speech. Thank you so much for your time today. Along with your fantastic retrospective piece, what do you guys see as like the greatest advancement looking ahead on the horizon that's coming out soon? Also, and this is a personal thing, what can a medical student who's halfway through med school and desperately interested in maybe doing trauma surgery one day, I know the NRMP publishes things, but how many opportunities you get to talk to somebody who's so intimately involved? What can we do to make ourselves stand out during our clinical years as we try to pursue these specialties down the line?
So I think the cutting edge issue right now is the national trauma system. And that is going to take a lot of energy, collaboration, a lot of sweat equity, quite frankly. But I am persuaded that within the next decade, we will have a national trauma system. And then I'm happy to talk with you offline about how to get you engaged in trauma as a medical student.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
I'll just add congratulations, and I certainly wish you the best. I think as far as engaging learners, this is a wonderful opportunity for us, and I can speak to a program which we've developed in Kentucky called the Kentucky Action, which is bringing Appalachian students that are interested in medicine, specifically oncology, into the cancer clinic and into the practice of cancer care at all levels, so that they begin to develop that enthusiasm and we really recruit them. I also work with a network across Kentucky that is challenged with finding enough medical providers, medical oncologists in particular, and the only way that we're going to solve that is by developing a pipeline that begins at a young age and developing that enthusiasm and focusing that. And I think being able to translate that to larger programs is going to be critical. As far as going forward for the next 100 years, I think that we are moving into an area where we can no longer be an isolated cancer program. We have to be collaborative. And I think that we're seeing that in a number of ways within the cancer programs, the collaboration between the National Accreditation Program for rectal cancer, for breast cancer. We will continue to see expansion of those elements as we move forward, but the interplay between the Commission on Cancer and the overlap of the different standards so that we're not stepping on each other, but we're enhancing the value is a way that we're going to move forward. But I think collaboration is going to be the key between our programs within the college, but between our cancer programs and the communities.
Time for one last question, Dr. Elson.
Hey, Mike, thank you. Good conference. John, I was taken, and as I've gotten older, I think a lot of the answers to what we deal with are prevention. And I think if you look back at the history of our trauma system, is one of the things that we've done well, and we've led in, and is precipitated into other things that we do, particularly on the Convention on Cancer, as he talked about cigarettes, is that we learned how to prevent trauma. And we learned how to safer highways, seat belts, et cetera, safer roads, what have you. Along those lines, you mentioned Linworth Jacobson, Stop the Bleed. Andy Warshaw and I wrote an article after that called Prevent the Bleed. And the concept there was taken from the Newtown massacres and all this other stuff. And all the time we spent on getting a fellow and writing an impact statement from the Board of Regents while I was there, it seems like gun violence is a ubiquitous problem that's growing rapidly in America. And I was wondering what your thoughts, it wasn't mentioned in your talk, and we've talked before about this. And I was wondering if you might address where you think we need to go going forward in the next 100 years about trying to reduce the ridiculousness of gun violence in this country.
So thanks for your question, and I want to emphasize there's been a lot of great work that's been done prominently within the past 5 years, really spearheaded by Ronnie Stewart, to bring people together, those who have differing views on how we can navigate our challenge with gun violence. And with equipoise, have come up with recommendations that would get us to a better place. We have worked hard to move some of those recommendations forward through a very difficult political process. And one area where we've had success is that we are funding, as a nation, research into gun violence and prevention by the CDC and by the NIH. $25 million for that research is in the budget again. It was in the budget 2 previous cycles. That is not insignificant given the passions that are involved with this issue. And I think we are going to continue to move forward with equipoise so that we achieve what everyone says they want to achieve. As Wayne Meredith has said, fewer gun holes in people. That's what we'd like to see, and there is common ground there. So this remains a prominent part of the advocacy agenda.
Thank you, John.
Thank you both for sharing with us today. It's been a great talk. Thank you.